Jennifer, and by the way, if anyone lives in, where?
Westminster North.
Westminster North, you can get a chance to vote for her as well.
And campaign for me and give out leaflets. That's like poor Jason there, doing all that Sunday.
We have one other candidate actually there at outside the door, not the kid, who is Joe. Just give a bow there. Joe Stewart, who's our candidate in Wandsworth. So thank you anyway. Right, we'll now have questions, and if I could have the speakers up here, and we'll take some quick questions, and preferably short ones. So I'll take them 3 each go, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I got you. You and you. Yeah. Have you got yourselves? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. This one's to Dan. Does TTIP have any influence on these debt agreements?
Yeah. We'll take the 3 questions and then yeah.
I've actually got one for Ben and Dan. They're both very quick, I promise
That's
you.
Good.
For Ben, I just wanted to get his views on the use recently of the US Constitution to highlight torture by the military, and how in the UK that hasn't come out and the UK government have actively blocked it. And to Dan, one of the things he mentioned early on was the way that vulture funds have used secondary markets in order to get this debt. Now, he talked a lot about the solutions that Jubilee campaign will come up with for dealing with bad debt and the first market, but how would you actually deal with that secondary market? Thank you.
And you were the top.
So to Ben, I think basically what you were saying is the way the modern military is working, or at least in the sort of ally countries, is it's becoming a machine for manufacturing more terrorists, or am I reading too much into it? So that's a request for you to comment on that.
Okay. That's it. Right. Who wants to start? Ben, you might as well start.
Okay, on the torture, I think we all know about that. The British government has stalled at every available opportunity in revealing our involvement in this process. But it's nothing new. There's a great book by a journalist called Ian Cobain called Cruel Britannia, and it details Britain's involvement in torture, all Britain's involvement in torture post-World War II. You know, he's talking about Malaya, Aden, Dhofar, Northern Ireland, you know, every conflict we've been involved in. You know, and there are many reasons why we don't want this revealed, but I think something we might want to think about is Britain's status in the world. And I think this is actually aimed at our domestic audience, because part of the reason why we're able to continuously fight these wars of aggression, you know, whether that be in Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, you know, is that this idea that Britain is somehow morally superior to the rest of the world actually permeates our society. We've been fed on this since we were children, that we're the good guys. You know, we fought the Japanese, we fought the Germans, we discovered the concentration camps, and for the British government to openly admit an involvement in torture in Iraq and Afghanistan would just destroy that myth, the myth that we are this good country. And it would make it more difficult for us to claim the higher moral ground, and to be able to claim that somehow we are the answer to some other people's problems. In terms of the point you made at the back there, yeah, of course, and it's been acknowledged by the CIA many years ago that it's our actions in the Middle East that lead to terrorism being carried out against us. The CIA have a name for it, it's called blowback. You know, for every military campaign that we carry out, there are unforeseeable consequences that we cannot know about. For all of the surety that a government will give us about the outcomes of a certain conflict, they are always wrong. And you can see this by, if we just look at Afghanistan for an example, if we go back for the original reasons we went into Afghanistan and all of the different reasons we were given all the way through that conflict, I think we were given about 10 different reasons for being there, and a different sort of reason at the end when they tried to define some sort of victory. So yeah, that is what I'm getting at, you know, that our actions lead to this terrorist action. And I think that example I spoke about how 17 of the 25 top ISIS commanders were detained by us in Iraq, it says a lot.
So just answering your point there about the secondary market, I mean, we have to rewrite the whole international debt system, you know, in a kind of short way of kind of answering that. The UN General Assembly, which approved this this new law, what they're doing is they're redesigning. There's going to be a multilateral framework put in place to deal with the kind of debt restructuring process. The details of that have not been agreed yet. I mean, the vote at the UN was simply to say, now we have to establish a committee to set one up. So we don't know the detail yet. But one would hope that, you know, that the whole notion of speculating on national debt is prohibited, is outlawed. I don't know whether, you know, what actually happens or if that will actually happen or not. I mean, I suppose the question is when companies like the vultures or hedge funds, when they buy up debt, do they know what the origins of that debt are? And I'm sure in some instances they don't. In a lot of instances they have been advised by the legal counsel that it is illegitimate or it has dubious origins and therefore it's illegal. But we don't know. One proposal that has been kicked about, and this isn't necessarily GB Debt Campaign's position, is the establishment of a global debt court under the United Nations auspices to do various things, one of which is to determine the legitimacy of each country's debt. But the problem with that is it's then established by a kind of third party as opposed to the people from the country itself. And you know, one thing that this kind of global debt court that doesn't actually exist, it's just an idea, is, you know, not necessarily just do that, but actually kind of in the process of doing so, make hedge funds aware of exactly what the origins are of the debts they're trying to invest in. So if that happened, then hopefully it would make something twice. I mean, the reality is hedge funds have nothing to lose. They've got no consumers, they've got no shareholders, so there's no, you know, when we talk about consumer boycotts and things like this of companies like Nestle or whoever it might be, they've got absolutely no incentive. So the options are very limited, and you know, it's just about redesigning the whole global debt system, quite frankly. The question about TTIP, I don't work for Jubilee Debt Campaign, so I don't know enough about TTIP to actually be able to comment on that, I'm afraid.
Right. Because obviously part of it involves setting up these courts where investors can basically take national governments to court over regulation and stuff like that. So I was wondering if that could actually undermine any of this new, you know, debt regulation.
I think the problem is that we don't know how the new debt regulation is going to work yet because we don't have the detail. There's bound to be conflicting kind of courts set up, conflicting legislation, and ultimately I think a lot of the time it's just going to come down to a question of political will about how individual governments behave, the positions they take, and that kind of thing. And this is why activism is really important, because it's really up to people like us, to citizens, to actually put pressure on our elected representatives. I would argue to support the Green Party in order to, you know, Caroline Lucas was able to sponsor that bill in Parliament where 106 MPs signed the other day a motion to support Argentina and Greece against the vulture funds. If people like that aren't in the Parliament, then we have to resort to other means. But yeah.
Thanks. I've got to send a attendance sheet around, if you could write it up, and if any have Twitter accounts, please put them on them as well. If you're booked in by Eventbrite, you don't have to do it. So I think there's 26 here booked in by Eventbrite. So just pass it on to the next person. Yeah. Thanks. Right, 3 more questions now, and I want 3 women this time. Otherwise I'll be accused of sexism. So there's 1 there, 2. Come on, there must be another.
Right, this is a question for
Just
Ben.
choose them, yeah.
I was just wondering if you could tell us when you began to change your attitude. I mean, you were obviously admiring of the military as a young man. I'm not saying you're not young now, but I mean, was it when you were still in Iraq, or was it only afterwards when you began to change your views?
Who is the, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, actually also to Ben, but it could go to you as well in a way. It's about being part of a system and then stepping outside it and whether you opt to change it. And I guess, Ben, be interested to know what about your organisation and your work, like what the aim of giving your talks are, because I heard you give it a lot, but, you know, and you, because you were in journalism and sets outside it, you know, have you then kind of, like, spoken about that, or, you know, connected with journalists about that change of heart?
And one more question. Come on, no, you can't all be that shy. Okay, a man God, they've all got embarrassed. Okay, you got in first. Yeah, you got it.
I have a hand up twice.
Okay, I'll take 4 of you, sort of. Yeah,
I was just
you
curious,
and you.
I was just curious about the end of your story about the Greek government going against their previous commitment to chase down illegal debt. I like the end of that story.
Okay, and you.
Yeah, my question is to Dan. Well, a quick one beforehand. Used a word that I'm not familiar with. I think it was neo-extractivism or something like that. I wonder if you could explain that term to me. But the real question I have for you, you've questioned the legitimacy of sovereign debt, and some of the figures you mentioned pale into insignificance compared to our own sovereign debt. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about the legitimacy of the UK's national debt.
Off you go. Jennifer, you can start first this time.
Well, I have to say, the first thing I feel is a huge relief not to be part of an institution, because the whole time you're in it, you're overriding your natural instincts because you think you're serving a greater good by not listening to your inner instinct. And now that I've stopped doing that to myself, it's extraordinary, and I realise that there's a whole community of people who don't do that to themselves as a way of life, and that's a much better way to do that. And I haven't spent any time trying to change that because there's so many other things higher up my needing to change this, but it is definitely on the...
Ben, you had that same question, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, sure. So my sort of change of heart, change of mind actually came whilst I was serving in Iraq. And I could talk about this for a long time, but I'll try and get it down in about 90 seconds. I mean, when I deployed to Iraq, I suppose the first thing I noticed was that it was like a gold rush town. If you've ever read about San Francisco during the gold rush, that's what it felt like. There's all these people shooting around there, and you could almost smell the money. But from my own sort of personal experience there, all of my military training, everything I'd been involved in before, it was always definitely against. We were trained to fight against an enemy. Whether that enemy was the IRA or the Taliban, whatever. And in Iraq, we were deployed against civilians. There was no doubt about that. We were deployed to harm civilians. And actually going into people's houses every night and seeing the fear and the upset on these people, seeing the children, the look on the children's faces when we were dragging their fathers out of the house, seeing the fear on the men's faces when they knew, these people knew where they were going. And I just started to think, how would I feel if this was happening to me? How would I feel if this was happening to my family? And it made a big impression on me. And I think the sort of nail in the coffin as far as my army career went was I was in a room not much dissimilar to this, and the CO of the Special Air Service was briefing us, and he said that he was worried that we were becoming the secret police of Baghdad. And when you hear that from your own CO, it kind of confirms everything you were thinking about. In terms of Veterans for Peace, we've got a wide range of veterans in our organisation. We've got our oldest member was at D-Day, a 15-year-old at D-Day, and we've got soldiers and sailors, and airmen, women, who represent all of the conflicts since then. And you could split our work into 3 areas. The education work is of vital importance. We go into schools and we give lectures, like a longer version of what I've given you tonight, to try and give children a fuller picture about what the military is about, what you're going to be expected to do, and what those conflicts are about, to try and counter the propaganda that I think all our children face. We also carry out sort of resistance to militarism in a non-violent way. On Remembrance Sunday, after the States sort of parade down at Whitehall there, we march down there under a banner of Never Again and lay white poppies in remembrance of all those killed in war. The state parade will only remember British and Commonwealth dead. And we're also involved in solidarity work. I've just returned from Northern Ireland yesterday, where we have started a programme of reaching out to communities and organisations that we were deployed against. We're going to nationalist and Republican groups. We've spoke on platforms and in private meetings with former members of the IRA to try and understand what it was like to be on the receiving end, on the other side of the hill, as it were. And that's really about reaching out the hand of friendship to former enemies, but also trying to get a greater understanding. Because our versions, even if we're in the military with first-hand experience, our versions of these events are entirely one-sided. So that's some of the work that we're up to. You can check out our website if you want to see more.
So, on the first question about the Greek debt and you know, the potential audit of the Greek debt. So, support for this was building very strongly around 2010. There was, in fact, I think the equivalent of an O-Day motion that actually went to the Greek Parliament in that year. It didn't pass, calling for a public audit of the Greek debt. I think what's happened is that as Syriza have moved closer and closer to power, what they've tried to do in their discourse is focus much more, because there's two issues really at play here, and they are connected. But I was speaking to Marina Printoulis, who's one of Syriza's representatives in the UK, about this the other day when we spoke on a panel together. And what she was saying is that there's two issues for Syriza politically. One is to deal with the anti-austerity measures, so the austerity measures, and to try to reduce those down to make life more bearable for the Greek people in the short term. And the other one is tackling the debt in itself. I think at the moment the kind of Syriza leadership, as I understand it, is prioritising the question of austerity and trying to make kind of the measures more bearable. You know, I think that if you look at the deal that was done and finalised this morning when the Greek reforms were approved by the Eurogroup, that comes out quite strongly. That you know, it's the austerity measures that they're trying to challenge. I think what could happen is, whilst they belong to the euro, it's very difficult for practically for the Greek government to actually call a debt and then say we're not going to pay it, because they'll just get kicked out. And Syriza's position at the moment is to stay in the euro. The reason being, from what I understand, because the majority of Greek people want to stay in the euro. If we find ourselves 4 months down the line that Greece exits the euro when the current bailout plan expires, I think Syriza could become much more radicalised, and actually the Greek population could become much more radicalised in its demands, and then we could see the calls for a public debt audit, and not just the calls for, but for it to happen, in real life. Neo-extractivism. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So countries in Africa, in Latin America, the traditional kind of economics models that they've relied on, and their traditional kind of position with the kind of global division of labour, if you like, is as an agro-exporter. Okay, exporting their natural resources and using the revenues to try to develop their industry. I mean, this is what Peronism is all about, trying to move into industry and other sectors as time went on. Neo-extractivism, because it's obviously, Latin America and Africa have gone through. Do you know about the Washington Consensus reforms? Basically, so these governments used to be very much protectionist, nationalist as well. But because they accumulated, the military dictatorships, especially in Latin America, accumulated huge debts. They then they kind of started to run out of money. There's a big debt crisis in the 1980s. In order to get new loans, the IMF started to impose quite severe conditionality upon these countries in return for new loans, which consisted of privatising state industry, speeding up even further the extent of kind of generating national revenues through exporting natural resources, oil, gas, and these kind of things. So really opening up the economy, opening up the free market, removing welfare protections, removing labour rights, pensions, etc. This is the process that Latin America went through. This is the process that a lot of African countries went through in the 1980s and 90s. And Then there was this big kind of reaction against that when these countries' poverty levels shot through the roof. In fact, even today in Africa, the poverty figures have doubled in the last 10, 15 years. There was a reaction against that. In Latin America, what you had is an election of kind of left-wing governments. You know, we all know Hugo Chavez, others like Bachelet in Chile, and the Kirchners in Argentina, etc. And they went back, they kept some continuities with neoliberalism, but they also started to protect their economies much more strongly, invest more heavily in social programs, etc. Now, because a lot of them are still tied into these heavy debts, especially Argentina and others actually, the only way that they can actually pay back these debts, whilst also fulfilling their election promises of increasing poverty programs for the poor, increasing the minimum wage, supporting trade unions, protecting labour rights, is regrettably to go back to the old ways of not protecting their kind of primary industries, but to exporting again, yeah, to digging up. There's a huge fracking industry in Argentina, in the north, in the indigenous lands. Indigenous people are being thrown off their lands, and fracking is taking place on a massive scale. The same with mega mining. So this is the NEO, yeah. Sorry, I know that was supposed to be a quick answer, but I've ended up talking a lot. And just on the kind of British, the illegitimacy, the British debt. Well, I mean the obvious thing to think about is obviously the banking bailouts. The question of how illegitimacy can mean different things in different countries. Okay, there are also many countries where Britain has obviously sold arms to, Saudi Arabia, other countries. Sometimes on loan basis, yeah. Sometimes there's payment made up front, but the British kind of debt, if you like, can be seen as illegitimate for certain reasons. Again, I think because Jubilee focus a lot of their investigative efforts on less powerful countries, they haven't necessarily done a huge amount of research into the British debt itself.
Thanks, Dan. Now you found a new word. They say you should learn a new word every day. New extractivism. You should take that home and use it at the dinner or the breakfast table in the morning. Speaking about extractivism and things, we do need to send the bucket around. And now, to be quite honest, we've had 3 good speakers here. If you go to any ordinary conference, that would cost you 25 to 50 quid or so. So we're not asking that, unless there's some disguised millionaires, and from looking at you, they're very well disguised. But if you're stuck for money, we all are, just pass the bucket on, don't worry about it. But we could do with, and if anyone has got a spare 250,000, we need it for next year's election. The GLA elections will be coming. You just pass on as it goes. Right? Yes, see, that's an idea. We'll have to get. I'll have to bring my machine in from the shop. And I'll take one more round of questions just while the bucket is going around, just to keep you sitting down. So I'll take 3 more questions. Don't worry, the bucket will be coming to you. 1, 2. You. Who's the third one? The last one to ask a question tonight, and you. It would be nice to one to Jennifer as well. She's only had 1 question tonight. So right, we're first here, yeah.
Well, a question for Jennifer.
Oh, good.
Going back to your editor, who didn't want poverty mentioned before the commercial break on News of 10. Obviously, that was during a time when the News of 10 platform had, well, just one rival or 2 rivals, if you take California News as well. How do you think, or do you think, that attitudes and the techniques for news gathering and imparting has changed as a result of the multi-platform now, where they have such, I mean, are they more hard-asked about it, or
that's a good question. I mean, it's got even worse. When I started covering legal affairs, for example, we would only cover a story if it was a legal decision that had implications. You know, it changed case law, it set a precedent. by the time I left, you only covered a legal case if there was a sexual crime or something particularly horrific. So it's gone from being, you know, information giving to entertainment giving. So yeah, and it's getting worse.
I think you were next one too.